Well, thank you, Tom, for such a generous and kind introduction, which my mother would have loved as well. And thank you to the Urban Taskforce for inviting me, and also for reorganising the schedule to allow me to speak at 2 o'clock and not 4 o'clock. I feel like it's a metaphor for this government's intentions when it comes to infrastructure delivery. It's early and it's on budget as well. I too want to acknowledge the leadership of Urban Taskforce, as well as the leader, Peter Ackerstrath, the Productivity Commissioner, who's here, as well as the other industry leaders who have gathered here this afternoon, who strive every day to make sure that we have housing for our population as well. I was very eager to come to the conference. Fever wouldn't stop me at all, so I am very pleased, but you do have to forgive me if every now and then I have to cough. I will also take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations person who is present here today. And the New South Wales Government pledges our ongoing solidarity with all First Nations people across Australia and in New South Wales as we continue our march towards reconciliation and towards perfecting this democracy so it's respectful of all our citizens as well. I want to talk to you today about housing. A place to call home is, of course, a fundamental human need, and it is foundational to a person's quality of life. It means someone can make a life for themselves and can hold down a job, can participate in their community and can contribute to their society. When my parents migrated to this country from India in the 1970s, the fact that they were able to afford to raise their children here turned on the fact that on a accounts clerk's wage and the wage of a geologist, they were able to purchase a house as a new migrant close to excellent public schools, excellent public hospitals, excellent roads as well. And indeed, you can't divorce a middle-class life from access to housing that is affordable, regardless of whether you're buying, you're renting or you're in social housing. But we do recognise that housing is a huge challenge. It's a challenge for the government and for many people today. I don't need to tell you that housing affordability has declined over the last 3 decades. Housing costs as a proportion of disposable income have risen since 1994, and demand has consistently outstripped supply. Those with the least advantage already are being held back by the most by this fundamental change. And as individuals with great potential, the fact that people have to pay more to pay a roof over their head is a real reason why inequality is growing in New South Wales. And I haven't got the best news. I'm sure you will hear this yourself, but there is a wide expectation that housing is getting harder to find in New South Wales. Rents are up 16.4% over the past 12 months. Mortgage repayments are up $17,300 more on average per loan since 2022. And our population is up by 156,000 in the last 12 months. Demand is, of course, a challenge. Cost and equity are a challenge, but supply is the solution. And this government, from the moment it was elected, has argued fundamentally, at some political cost to us, about the need for us to build more. And we are the first government to be elected in New South Wales on a very long time that did not campaign on a not in my backyard platform. I'm also mindful of the fact that times are tough for suppliers too. There is supply chain disruption. Inflation and its effect on fixed price contracts is putting a lot of pressure on the construction firms, and we are dealing with skills shortages. All of these have combined to push several big developers to the wall. The collapse of Porter Davis and ProBuild have been well covered, but I'm also aware that 2,213 businesses in construction failed in the last financial year. That's a problem that anyone who wants to build more housing needs to confront. And the government is very mindful of the challenges that the industry is facing, even if we do all agree on the need to build more homes. The practical sense of being able to deliver it is getting hard. We recognise as a government that 95% of dwellings built in New South Wales are built by private developers. We recognise the importance of government working with the private sector and influencing the conditions which affect its ability to operate. The actions that the government has taken in our 6 months have been many, but we are mindful of the fact that this is a significant iron crisis. Sydney rental vacancy rates were 1.3% in April, the lowest levels seen in more than a decade. The Premier has said to this group and to others that the core problem is that we are not building enough housing to keep up with demand. When I became the Treasurer on March 28 and was handed my incoming government brief, I was told that New South Wales needs to build 314,000 new dwellings, or about 62,800 a year over 5 years, but is only expected to complete 180,000. We were told to expect a shortfall of 134,000 new dwellings. We're also told that housing approvals were trending down, and they're continuing to trend down, with annual approvals declining by 18% in March and an annualised trend now falling below 40,000, which incidentally is a fact Tom reminds me of every time the housing approval figures come out when he sends me his email as well. Adding to this pressure is New South Wales population growth has increased. In the budget that I gave in September, about a month ago, we upwards revised quite a few figures, but including our population growth expectation figures. In part, that's because the federal government has made an adjustment to the national immigration intake, but it's also because more people who cross the oceans to come to our boundless plains to share call New South Wales home first. We are dealing with a rapidly ageing population, and we have chronic skills shortages too. Which brings me to the solutions and what we're doing. A crisis as big as this needs more than one solution and action from more than one level of government. We recognise the fact that we need planning reform, we need the right infrastructure to roll out, we need houses to be built, we need funding from government at several levels, and we need collaboration. I want to go through what we are doing at a state government level, and then I want to go through some ideas about how the federal government might assist us to change with change in the mix of its current funding for housing. I want to start by talking about some of the work we are doing to improve assessment times, reduce red tape, eliminate double handling and fast-track projects that deliver greater public benefits, which create jobs and keep the economy moving. Let me start with planning. We are streamlining planning regulations so that it's easier to deliver housing in line with community needs. Our budget committed to the faster planning program to overhaul and simplify the planning system and to invest in innovations like artificial intelligence pilots to speed up DA approvals, the first government to do so. $38.7 million is allocated to make planning faster, and that includes $9.1 million for the government to assess housing supply opportunities across government-owned sites, given that we are the biggest landholder in Australia, $5.6 million for an artificial intelligence pilot to deliver planning system efficiencies, and yes, we have made it clear that we are overhauling and simplifying the planning agencies of government. Prior to our election, we listened very clearly to the feedback that was coming about the multitude of planning agencies that are involved in making administrative decisions. The Premier announced the abolition of the Western Sydney Parklands Authority, and we also announced the merger of the Greater Cities Commission back into the Planning Department as well. What I'm pleased to tell you is that that work is ongoing, and we will be looking at further opportunities for us to simplify the number of government agencies that people need to deal with if they intend to build in New South Wales as well. And we look forward to continuing that work in Budget 2, which work we're starting on next week. Equally, we have announced a $2.2 billion housing and infrastructure plan, and that includes $400 million from Restart New South Wales, new money that will go towards the enabling infrastructure that people need if we're going to build a house. No one can pick up the key to their front door unless there's a road that goes to their driveway. And what we did with that particular fund is that we looked at every leftover Restart New South Wales project, which was the projects funded by electricity privatisation by the previous government. We found every cent left over that has literally been idling in government bank accounts for years, and we husbanded them all together and are now mobilising them to build housing. The smallest amount of leftover money we found was $18 left over on a construction project in the Northern Beaches. That's the magnitude of the diligence that we did in this budget to be able to find additional resources at some pretty tough times to redeploy it as well. I'm also really pleased that we have tasked Landcom with re-entering certain markets in which we know that it's difficult for the private sector to lead in. $300 million of dividends that otherwise would be arriving in the general coffers will stay with Landcom to deliver an additional 1,409 affordable homes and an additional 4,000 market homes as well. We do recognise that this is only just the start and more needs to be done to fix the housing crisis, and we're looking for every opportunity to build. In June 2023, the government also announced a whole suite of reforms to accelerate the delivery of social and affordable housing. I know that this will be subject of conversation with the panel about whether or not we've got the rules right, about whether or not housing developments with a capital investment value over $75 million and the 15% gross floor, and I can tell you this, your sector has been loud and clear about its feedback here, and it's something which I'm looking forward to listening to you about as well, about whether or not we are what we could do to make sure that that is a usable form. And we accept the fact that we need to listen to you in that. I also say the New South Wales Government is focused on driving through more supply through collaboration with local government and communities and private sector too. When it comes to first home buyers, I know it's some controversy, but we did have an interesting debate throughout the course of the last election about what was the right policies to assist first home buyers, and the government has kept its commitment towards first home buyers by making sure that those are purchasing dwellings up to $800,000 pay no stamp duty or land tax, with concessions available to those less than $1 million. We've also made it clear that we are keen on the idea of build to rent. Both in the private sector and the public sector. We funded our own developer Landcom to begin some trials in the north and south coasts. Regional New South Wales, I'm often told by many a mayor that they don't get the same housing investment and the same levels of interest by developers to necessarily develop in those communities. They have very thin markets. And so the whole point of having a government developer is in areas where it may not be economic for the state, for the private sector to do it, the government can add. I recall sitting down with the mayor of Warren and Cobar. Warren is building a lot of solar infrastructure right now, and Cobar, Coppertown as well, both made the point to me that no one had offered to build any new housing in their communities for the last 30 years. And they have 1,500 houses in Warren, and there hasn't been housing supply growth in Warren. And it used to be a part of the Grand Belt, but right now its future is tied heavily to to renewable energy. And so part of the reasons why we've made that commitment is because we understand the fact that for regional New South Wales, in which the housing shortages are just as acute, if not more, we do need to be an all-hands-on-deck solution there. And so tasking the government's own developer to lead in that respect and demonstrate whether or not these models are feasible is a good thing, which I'm particularly proud that we've done. I want to talk about, I know, some of the other issues which are occupying Urban Taskforce as well, particularly with the metro projects as well. We've been upfront about the fact that Sydney metro projects present a big opportunity, but we have been clear that they must be delivered in a cost-effective way. The government did engage independent experts to review the metro projects to make sure they can be delivered and deliver value for money for our citizens. In fact, the very early part of the government was spent staging a rescue of the City Southwest Metro program, the Sydenham to Bankstown conversion, that was otherwise at risk of being completely cancelled after cost escalations that were quite dramatic and many issues that were plaguing that particular project. But we've also been clear about the fact that if we had to borrow so much money from our children and our grandchildren to build these projects, then we have to make sure that they yield a strong housing return. And we have to make sure that we're making this investment to build housing, not simply to deliver a windfall gain to those landowners who happen to be surrounding the property as well. But I'm sure that that will be a feature of conversation as we get to the panel. I do want to talk about some suggestions that I have for the federal government as to how they can assist us in meeting this challenge in the biggest state in the Federation. I want to be clear about the fact that we do welcome the arrival of the federal government with money into this space. We do welcome the fact that the Prime Minister, at great political cost to him, waged a pretty strong campaign for the Housing Infrastructure Fund that has now been passed by the Senate. And we are welcoming of the fact that the Commonwealth has the Housing Support Program as well, but with incentive schemes for states to build more housing. But there was no use providing incentives for housing in 5 years' time, which is what the federal government's proposal is. We need that money now. The earlier we get access to that money, the more likely we are to be able to engage in some further enabling reform. So if the Commonwealth were instead to reallocate the funding split between its housing support program and its new home bonus plan, we're pretty confident we could fund more infrastructure faster to bring support online earlier. I think that the suggestion that I have for the federal government is that the housing support program should be increased from $0.5 billion to $3 billion across Australia to build infrastructure now, and the government will work with the federal government if they want to offset this this acceleration by reducing the new home bonus by the same amount. It's nice to get a cheque from the Commonwealth in 2029, 2030, but we actually need the money now if we want to be able to combine our fiscal firepower and get this agenda going. I do think that bringing forward funding to housing support, which will make it much easier for us to increase total housing supply and deliver increased housing supply in a shorter time frame. I also think it will do a lot to create the social licence we require to build the housing that we need, so it's clear to communities that the infrastructure that they expect to be there before they pick up the keys is in fact there. It would mean more support upfront for significant local infrastructure. It would allow us to work far more in partnership with local governments to roll out reform earlier, and it would ease many of the battles that otherwise could take place as we go about the task of building more housing. That's why I'm advocating for this change. That's why I'm looking forward to having conversations with my federal and state counterparts on this as we go about resolving how these schemes will work in practice. I do accept the fact that this government can always do more. I also accept the fact that we're welcoming of feedback to suggestions about how we can do things better. But I do think we should recognise the fact that in this government we have been pretty brave in making the case for new housing, and we've been pretty upfront about showing people how we can do it differently in a manner that retains its social licence, so ultimately we can continue to ensure that a person who comes to this state, to any of our cities or any of our towns, can afford to put a place over their heads. I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much for turning out to listen to me. I hope that I too haven't given you any fever. Thank you.